All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Workforce Wednesday webinar. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. I will be your moderator and facilitator for today's webinar. This afternoon, we're going to be listening to WIOA Title 1B Program Year Local Performance Negotiations. Excuse me. This is a follow-up webinar to Workforce Wednesday webinar that we had at 1 o'clock a couple weeks ago. So thank you for joining us. And we are joined by the performance team, Mark Burgess, and his team to go ahead and present on this information. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and we will have it on our Illinois Workforce Academy website along with the slide deck from today. So I'll go ahead and put that URL in the chat here momentarily, but you will also have a follow-up email tomorrow where you can access that. And then we do have closed captioning on for accessibility reasons. If you need to sorry, I thought I wasn't recording. Oops. If you need to take notes or for accessibility reasons. And then I will go ahead and launch our performance polls that we do for any performance webinars. So we would just like to know, where's your local area at today? And then what is your role in the WIOA system? And I'll give everyone about 30 seconds to answer those. Okay, a couple more seconds. We'll give everyone a minute here. So a couple more seconds before we hit a minute to answer those polls. All right, I'll go ahead and end that and share the results. Looks like we have quite a few directors and performance managers, as well as system administrators, couple career planners, and then hitting mostly northern and central Illinois with a couple people sprinkled in the south and Chicago areas. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing that poll, and then I'll hand it off to Mark Burgess and his team to get us started. If anyone has any questions during today's webinar, you can feel free to type those in the chat, the Q&A, or raise your Zoom hand and I will unmute you and you can ask those verbally. So I'll hand it off to you, Mark.
Thanks, Kirsten. Really appreciate everyone showing up today to hear a little bit more about the performance negotiations that we're going to be conducting over the next couple of months. We spoke to this briefly at both our office hours back in May and the webinar that Kirsten referenced on assessments a couple of weeks ago. This here is our performance team that you're all becoming very familiar with. April Bernard is our performance and reporting manager. Paula is here to help support with all her years of experience. Ray continues to build his and going to be helping Paula respond to questions. As Kirsten said, please put your questions in the chat. In the Q&A, which is accessible at the bottom in your, there's a circle with indicating more. Click on that and you'll be able to see question and answer. Open that up and please submit questions there so that we can respond to them immediately, keep record of those. You'll be able to review others' questions and the responses there as well. If you have just general comments, you can use the chat. We also have Andy Blank and Brian Richard representing the Northern Illinois University team. They're instrumental in developing the negotiation tool, supporting our negotiation process, as well as the assessments and many other online tools that you're becoming familiar with. So appreciate Andy's going to present several of the slides today to show you and walk you through the actual tool. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off. I don't like the glare on my glasses that comes from that. So we'll eliminate that and I'm going to move on to here's our agenda today. We're going to provide some update on negotiation policies that'll be coming out very shortly and guidance, especially on the negotiation process. For those of you that have been through this process over the last several years, this is now our fourth cycle of this process, and we haven't changed it much because you've all been very pleased with the process. Interaction between all of you and us here at OET, so we've felt no need to really make any wholesale changes. There are a couple differences that we'll point out and make sure that you're all aware of. We'll mention the program year assessments. Because again, we talked 2 weeks ago about some irregularities. We want to point out how those have been addressed in the tool. We want to point out your negotiation team, what you need to think about as a local board in setting your team, those members who are going to be part of that team coming to a negotiation call, as well as someone being identified as the lead for each team. We'll go through that process of submitting expected levels, or what we also call proposed goals, to OET prior to you scheduling a negotiation call. And then we'll let Andy talk about the negotiation tool in a summary and walk you through that in a live demonstration. We'll, as always, take questions and provide some answers to you. So feel free to present those in the Q&A, as I mentioned, and we'll either address those through the presentation, or we'll type a response in and all of you will be able to see that. Um, as a reminder, there are kind of three big steps to the negotiation process. We want, as we're doing already, we want all of you to have some time to plan for this. Hopefully you've been doing some of that by looking at your past performance in history, and also looking at your participant pools. We will ask that you submit those proposed goals. We have a form as well as instructions to submit that. We want to have those in by early September so we can get your calls scheduled. The earlier you get those in, we'll talk about this later, but the earlier you get those in, the sooner we can get you scheduled and have more available times and dates for scheduling those. The negotiation calls themselves, we ask the team members to come prepared, led by one of the lead, whoever's identified as the lead for your team. Once we conduct the call, come to agreement on all 15 metrics, we will then submit those to the regional office at Department of Labor and ask that you incorporate those into your local plan. Here's somewhat of a timeline. We conducted our state negotiation back in May with Department of Labor Region 5. We were very pleased with that. Some of the changes that you'll hear about today in this process, especially in submitting proposed goals, came out of some things that we did this time around, specifically providing them more and more and more information as we could to let them know where we were coming from, what our thoughts were and thinking plan going into the negotiation. It led to several of our proposed goals being accepted. We think that them having that information up front led to that. So we're going to be asking that you utilize a similar process when you submit your proposed goals. The negotiation tool, when Andy shows it, will show you those negotiated levels. Many of them were held at the same level. Some of them actually we were able to negotiate down, which is not always the case. And could be a pattern that you find might be necessary for yours. But again, we'll need to see some evidence, some justification and rationale to do that. Andy's presenting the tool today. I sent that out this morning. I apologize for not giving you a little bit more time to review that, but certainly as you review it, if you have any questions, present those to us, especially if you see any issues with any of the data. We want to make sure we address that and clarify anything. We're having today's webinar, and then the next steps are beginning today, start your planning. We'll ask you to go through that all the way up to the date of your actual negotiation. Historically, some of you like to get in the door early, so we see those proposed goals coming in the next few weeks, getting you scheduled and get those over with as soon as possible. Others like to have a little bit more time. And then, there's no preference on our end other than the later you wait, the less time options you might have available to you. We will start scheduling those in late August. So you'll have some time to still prepare for those if you're one of the sooner, earlier versions. At the end of this time, we do have to issue all of those goals to DOL. We will be issuing revised notice on this. The negotiation notice change 3 will become change 4. About the only thing that you will see different in that notice, as well as all the attachments, are the references to program years 26 and 27 versus the most recent one referencing program years 24 and 25. I don't think there's anything significant in anything that you'll see in this process. We've already issued the actual policy on negotiations. So you can see that it's in policy 3.8. We will also be holding office hours on August 12th. We'll include this topic of negotiations as part of that agenda and other things as necessary. And as I mentioned, we'll schedule those as receive your proposed goals. As a reminder, especially for those board members that may be joining us today, and we anticipate that the board staff that are here today will be sharing all this information, sharing a link to the webinar with board members and the CEO who are instrumental in developing a plan for submitting expected levels. Nothing new here. We are measuring all 5 metrics for 26 and 27. We did that in the 24 and 25 cycle as well. Nothing has changed with the definitions of each metric, just providing these for a reminder. Kind of a 3-step process and understanding of the terminology. Expected levels of performance are what you submit to us in those proposed goals. They're kind of different terminology for the same thing. Expected levels is what's in the act. Proposed goals is kind of the informal term we give them. Once we get into calls with you, we have negotiated levels of performance once we come to an agreement. And then finally, at the end of each program year, after a statistical adjustment model is applied, we have adjusted levels of performance. You're also all familiar with the 4th term of actual levels of performance. That's what you get when you calculate a numerator and denominator based on the guidance you have for each of those levels of performance. Preparing for negotiations. So some of the big steps are there are 4 negotiation factors that all states have to comply with in preparing for our state negotiations. Those are passed on to all of you. There are certainly other steps you can take or other factors you can take beyond these 4. But these are the 4 that are outlined in guidance. You want to compare yourself to similar local areas. I know some of you, it's hard to do that sometimes, even in a state the size of Illinois with 22 boards. Sometimes you have difficulty identifying which local areas might have the same or very similar economics or participant pools. But I think for the most part, in the past, you all have been able to identify those. You want to see how their performance is coming and how yours compares to theirs, because that could be reflected in what you submit in your expected levels or proposed goals. LWIS 7, you're probably a little bit unique because you have no one to compare to, but you've got some local areas around you that are still fairly large in size, have similar economic conditions as you have throughout some of the areas of Cook County. So always look at that. Those are identified in the negotiation tool. Second factor is using that negotiation tool. Andy will go through a lot of the elements of that tool, including the history of your outcomes, history of your assessments, the factors going into the statistical adjustment model, et cetera. So you'll be able to do that. There is an ability to compare LWIAs in that tool, as well as you have the iPad system where you can compare outcomes with other LWIAs. So you want to use that. We always ask that you're looking at opportunities to promote continuous improvement and ensure optimal return on investment. Your local boards, your CEOs, and we all expect that from our partners, our local partners throughout the state. And then sometimes you've noticed in past negotiations that works in your advantage in the sense you may have continuous improvement that doesn't advance an actual outcome, but it advances policy development, maybe procedural changes. And so your negotiation or your submission of expected levels might reflect that your continuous improvement is in that area, and eventually you anticipate that you will see some increase in your outcomes based on that that implementation. The last level or factor here is assisting us as a state in meeting our negotiated levels of performance. I'm going to show you those here in a minute from our May 15th call. I think we did very well. I'll speak a little bit more to that when we talk about proposed goals. But some other things you might want to consider when you're preparing and planning for negotiations are additional data that is not held in the negotiation tool, such as from IDS or BLS. Or maybe you have an account with an outside source, such as Lightcast, or various other avenues of data that might even be more current. We don't know what that data is if you don't provide that to us. So that's some of the information we expect to be provided when you submit your proposed goals. We will be expecting everyone to submit something to support your goals, to provide some justification and rationale outside of simply saying it's in the tool. And again, we'll talk about that in a moment. You may have some other MIS data that you want to present to us. You may have some policies, programs, processes, or other information that you think is relevant to why you're submitting the proposals that you are. We want to see all of that. By having that up front, it will help us prepare more, more in line with what your thinking is. And it could result, as it did, I think, in our state negotiation, with more goals being accepted that you proposed versus having to actually negotiate back and forth. If all we have is your historical data, then that's all we have to go with, and we have to negotiate with that in mind. So we will be expecting some kind of rationale and justification with every submission. One thing we want to caution you against is sometimes we've seen LWIAs come in and their justification is that we negotiated to a number 2 years ago and we're asking to come up 1 or 2%. We think that's a good negotiation. If your information, if your actual outcomes do not support such a increase, and what I mean by that is, let's say you negotiated to 60% on MSG and you come in with a proposal of 67% and ask that or indicate that's a good 2% increase and you think that's good rationale, but all of your outcomes historically are at 65, 68, 70%, that isn't good justification and not an expected submission that we would want to see. So be cautious of the past negotiated levels as any kind of factor in how you develop your expected levels and submit those. Here's what we agreed to with Department of Labor Region 5. All of those are in the larger black text. The green and red are indication of what we had as negotiated levels in program year 2025. You see an awful lot of red. I think that comes from, and I think our team here at OET will support, the reason we were able to get some negotiations lower than what we had in 2025 was, one, our outcomes suggested that over the last couple of years. Recency is a strong indicator versus 4, 5, 6 years average. And again, because of all the information we provided the Department of Labor in advance of our call with them, they were very appreciative of it. And again, many of these goals that we agreed to were what we submitted as expected levels, and they accepted them. So we hope that we can continue that pattern through 22 local negotiations. It will benefit all of us to not be on calls for 2 to 3 hours, if at all possible. We love talking to all of you, but I'm sure everyone has more to do with their time. So hopefully we can come to an agreement before on some of these metrics. We'll let you know in the call which ones we're accepting. And again, that rationale and justification is what's going to support that. So you'll see all these levels that we negotiated to in the in the negotiation tool. I think all we have in there is program year 2026 because it's a little cumbersome to try to put both of them when we show all of that. But Andy can confirm that in his presentation.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Andy. So you'll see on this sheet, we did have some of the goals where we showed in continuous improvement or asked for forgiveness in the first year, and we would show improvement in the second. One thing that we'll speak about it is related to IWDS 2.0. So hang on to that question if you have it in the back of your mind, how that is maybe going to be addressed. So here we'll move on a little bit more discussion on the actual goals proposal. There is a form attached to the WIOA notice. There are instructions to that to show you how to complete that. It's simply asking for each of the expected levels or proposed goals that you have for all 15 metrics. Again, that's 5 metrics in 3 WIA Title I programs. It also requires you to submit a team of up to 5 members who will be those on the call when we schedule and hold the negotiation discussions. Uh, as a team, you can invite anyone to help support development of your goals and plan for that negotiation. We just like to keep the numbers down during the call as much as possible, so it doesn't become an issue of too much conversation and downtime on the actual negotiation. We have a team of many people, including NIU and others at our partners who are helping us develop our side of the story, if you will. But we will have only our team and maybe a manager or two joining these calls. So we'll keep our team to only 5 as well. I mentioned this highlighted or bolded text again, including supporting data and rationale. What the form is expected, we actually will not accept any proposals without that rationale. And if we see that the rationale is really not something that we expected as far as anything more than what's in the negotiation tool, we may reach back out to you and ask you if that's truly what you want to submit, that it puts us at a disadvantage leading into our calls, and it may put you at a disadvantage when we try to negotiate. So again, use the time in the next several weeks as you prepare to submit proposed goals to put all of that information together and prepare and submit it to us as rationale. Historical data is good. I mentioned a few minutes ago, recency is important. If you've had an increase in your outcomes over the past 4 years, we wouldn't expect that your proposal is an average of those 4 years when the last 2 years is much higher than that average. But when your goals or your outcomes have been kind of up and down on a slope, then the average maybe is more relevant. So keep that in mind. Again, negotiated goals is really not a strong point and really not a point of that you should use as justification. It's a point to get you to your negotiation, get you as a reference point in outcomes and ultimately assessments, but your history is what you need to lean on and all that other justification you're going to provide to us. Anything that you provide to us, we should be able to validate, verify, replicate. So give us the source of that so that if we need to go out and get a little bit more information, we want to be able to do that. If not, we'll have to reach back out to you and you'll have to send us the information we may be still seeking. All chairs, local board chairs and CEOs will have to sign your proposal before you submit it. So please make sure if they're not on the call today that they're aware of the negotiations again and they're brought into the process. We do have some local areas negotiations where the board chair or board members are on the call, and we love hearing from all of you, all of the board chairs. We love to see you as part of this process, but it is your obligation, not the Title I obligation, to do negotiations. They're giving you that authority through this process, not absolving themselves of the authority. So keep that in mind. And then again, as we've done for all these years, we will not schedule your call until we receive your proposal, review it to ensure it meets all the guidance expected, and we can then reach out to you, indicate that we've accepted your proposals, and we're prepared to provide you all the remaining dates and times that you can schedule a negotiation call. Some of the do's and don'ts, some of these may be repetitive. Apologize for that, but just want to make the point that there are some good things to keep in mind, and there are some things you don't want to keep in mind or certainly don't want to replicate in your submission. You have to use the four factors, so utilize the tool that encapsulates all four of those factors I mentioned earlier. Submit all the supporting data with your proposal, including any data or information that you may be finding useful in the call itself. We should not be surprised in the call with you sharing information on processes, policies, data, information. We should already have that in front of us leading into the call, not be hearing it for the first time. That puts us again at a disadvantage. We have to take a separate call amongst our team to try to rationalize what it means for the negotiations. We'd like to have that information up front, so we've already done that work. Utilize data-driven, transparent, defensible justification. Again, we want verifiable, validatable information that you submit to us. Consider any programmatic, procedural, process, policy changes as you prepare and submit those proposals. The big one here, 2 weeks ago, we talked about Swiss data, the Swiss state wage interchange system, data irregularities, how that's affected PY24 and 25 assessments as far as absolving you or going to continue the pilot project where no sanctions will be applied for any unsuccessful assessments. Let us know how you think that affects you in your negotiation. If you feel like you've missed X number of outcomes, positive outcomes in the metric, let us know so that we can take that into consideration. While we're looking at this, and we actually could share our assessment. We need you to validate what you think has occurred in that. And also keep in mind, as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, for the two employment measures, second and fourth quarter after exit, the only thing that can happen by adding Swiss wages in is an increase in your actual outcome. So coming in with justification of we think we were missing 6 participants in the numerator of our goal, and so we think should have a lower negotiated level this time around, probably isn't reasonable thinking, considering those 6 are going to add to the numerator and increase the outcome. So keep that in mind. But we do want to hear about the Swiss interchange effects in your mind, in your board's mind. Similar to that, and I was just made aware of this yesterday, as you all, and we want to thank you for all the time you've helped us from the local level in developing IWIDS 2.0. All the UAT your staff have done. I can't imagine the amount of additional work this has brought on many of you, but you continue to do work and you're identifying, your career planners are identifying their participants in the new system and have identified in some instances some participants that did not migrate. Some of those didn't migrate from Career Connect in OWIA 7 to IWDS 1.0, and thus they couldn't have migrated to 2.0. Others have identified they think some participants were in 1.0 and they didn't migrate in 2.0. Let us know if you've identified participants and how many and how that might affect go into your considerations for submitting your proposed goals. Again, with thousands upon thousands of participants being migrated, OET, we just don't have the staff to be able to look at every single participant to help identify these migration issues. So we're relying on you to let us know that. Don't wait till negotiation and submission of proposal to tell us that. I'm not indicating that. Let us know up front. Let Al's team know during those hypercare sessions that you've identified an issue. But let us know in your submission that you have identified some individuals, how you think it affected outcomes and assessments in the past, and we'll be able to take that into consideration. Any questions with something like that or this Swiss wage issue, please let us know so we can consider it, provide a response, and if necessary, and it's something that all local areas need to hear, we want to get that message out to everyone so they can consider it as well. And again, provide justifications for all proposed goals. Reports on Michelle Griebler in the Q&A is asking about reports on target populations served. Those are forthcoming. I don't know what the timeline is for that. We'll ask and work with SIU and try to get some communication out with with that information to all the local areas. I know they're working on reports now. They were speaking to us a little bit about some of those this morning, and I know you have a need for those for multiple reasons. So we continue to monitor how well, not how well, but their progress on that, and hopefully we can get some of those, especially the ones needed for negotiations, out to you as soon as possible. Um, I think I've mentioned most of these don'ts to preparing and presenting proposed goals. Um, be realistic. Again, don't utilize the last session of or last cycle of negotiations as your rationale just because you negotiated to 60%, and 3% seems like a high number to increase. If your data and information and outcomes support a higher number, you should be recognizing that in your proposal because we'll be recognizing that in our preparations. Um, don't rely heavily on the negotiation tool. While Brian and Andy at NIU have worked with several of you in a work group to develop the statistical adjustment model, to develop the factors that are being considered in that tool or in this the statistical adjustment model, um, it's not perfect, and neither is the state version that DOL provides us. It provides you some predictions. Sometimes the predictions you have to look at, and I'm kind of smiling and ready to laugh. Sometimes you have to look at it and you just wonder how they are because sometimes they just don't reflect historical outcomes. Um, don't utilize something like that if you see it as your rationale for submitting. In the past, we've had people submit the entire negotiation tool of predictions as their proposal. That is an absolute no-no because it's not coming with any rationale or justification. The tool is a tool only. It's a predictive model. It has its positives, but it does certainly have some negatives. Utilize it as one of the factors, not as the sole factor. And don't submit, targets intentionally low because you think we'll accept them. It just sets us up in a bad position when we go into those negotiation calls. It gives a bigger gap if all other data and information supports a higher level that should have been proposed. It just makes it more difficult, and we've seen that in the past in the negotiations where that might have occurred. So again, we're trying to prepare you with the best information to help you prepare for these negotiations. I think in 99% of the negotiations I know that I've been involved with over the past three cycles, they've been all very friendly, very good discussions, and have led to very good outcomes that I think we all agreed upon without any animosity. And so I don't anticipate anything different this time around, but sometimes those negotiations took much longer because we had a lot more back and forth as we inched to an agreement, when in fact we probably didn't need to do that if the actual proposal started in a different place. So trying to help prepare you as much as possible. The last set of information I'll give you on how to prepare is some information that we used as we prepared and entered into negotiations with DOL. And again, I think this time all of our team, including Julio, Lisa Jones, who were in these negotiations, sometimes for the first time, would agree these were the most, the easiest negotiation we've had in the four cycles now. And the information we provided really supported that. We provided some information aimed at supporting federal goals. DOL, all departments have to respond to Congress and the president's office. They have goals that they have to meet. So similar to you helping us meet our goals, 50 states, 6 territories have to help DOL meet their goals. So we have to make sure when we negotiate, we're showing how we can assist them. Some states are going to be higher than the goal. Some states are going to be lower. Similarly, some local areas are going to be higher than the state goal. Some local areas are going to be lower. So to keep that in mind. Um, be realistic. We've already talked about SNAP and Medicaid changes in federal and state policies. Certainly let us know how you think those affect you locally. But we made that a pretty strong case to DOL, and we think that helped us in coming to agreement. So we certainly don't want to keep that from you using that as part of your rationale. We just need you to let us know how you think that might affect you. Some local areas are going to see a lot of SNAP recipients, a lot of increase in your participant pool potentially. Let us know what you think you're anticipating. Um, and one thing that we mentioned is we don't know historically SNAP recipients that come to our program willingly without this new federal change. I guess they're all willingly doing it. They didn't, don't have to enroll in WIOA if they don't want to. But before this federal policy and the potential to lose their benefits, they were coming to us because they really did want to find some gainful employment. Now people are being pushed, in a sense, to enroll because it's one of the options to overcome potential loss of their benefits. So historically, those SNAP enrollees have had a little bit lower outcomes in some areas versus others. We've seen some lack of commitment, meaning they've dropped out of programs maybe at a little bit higher. I'm not saying a significant degree, but at a little bit higher rate than our overall participant pool that enrolls in training. So let us know how that might be relevant to your local area. And then because of that, we hope that we learn more about this population. We, anticipate more guidance from our federal partners around this. And so if you feel like that's something that is a concern first year of negotiation, but maybe we can ask for you to show some continuous improvement in the second year and have a 1 or 2 point increase in that second year of 2027. We want you to reflect that in your proposal. USDO projections for the dislocated worker program. The MSG exceeded historical outcomes. As you look at yours, let us know if you think your local data indicates the same thing. Um, we held our credential outcomes fairly close. In fact, I think maybe we had a little bit of a decrease because we've been kind of stagnant around 75% as a state. We want to continue to provide you technical assistance and the information you need. We hope IWDS 2.0, as it sits now, but with enhancements, will only help increase these two educational outcomes because it will guide career planners in gaining information from participants and our training partners so that we can document as many as possible of these outcomes. We've seen a little bit of an employment rate decline in the youth program. We let them know that. We think part of that is because older workers are taking jobs historically that went to younger workers. If your local area that isn't the case, and you can't show us something or explain to us how that's affecting your economy, we may not be able to use that as a factor for you locally, even though we used it as a factor as a state, as a whole. We continue to think MSG should be higher. I've mentioned this to all of you. If you're at least performance managers, maybe directors have heard this. But when I consider, and this is me personally, I'm not saying this is an OET statement, but if I'm thinking about enrolling a participant in a training program, I would have a hard time justifying that enrollment if I couldn't identify at least one MSG as an outcome of it, of every single training program we're enrolling in. With that being said, we should be getting much higher than 65, 70% MSG reports in our system each program year. The exception to that, although I think we've explained how some of that can be overcome, is if someone comes into the program late in a program year, enroll in a training program late in the program year, and simply doesn't have enough time to reach an MSG. So, for example, a summer community college program starts June 15th. Can they really show that they've attained an MSG before the end of that program year on June 30th? maybe it seems impossible, but working with that provider, maybe there is some way of gaining an MSG through a test that shows an increase of knowledge, maybe through some work experience. And Paula, correct me if that's not what. Maybe I'm hopefully expressing one of the other ways through work experience, showing some increase in skills. We can count that as an MSG. Um, but there are ways that you can overcome that late in a program year. In the past, I think a lot of our missed MSGs were opportunities overlooked because it just didn't get in the system. You're going to be reminded as career planners in IWITS 2.0, hey, where are these MSGs? They should be documented within 10 days of knowing that they occurred, not waiting until June of the program year to start documenting these. So we expect that we're going to see an increase anyway through the system advancement, through just continuing to push this type of technical assistance and guidance to all of your career planners to document them when you find out. For all of you as administrators and program directors, working with your providers to ensure that they have built-in opportunities for measurable skill gains throughout their program so that we at least have one per program year, especially if that program overlaps multiple program years. So, sorry to harp on that so much, but I just think when we look at outcomes at 60 to 65%, as much of a struggle as it is sometimes to get MSGs, I think we have a lot of room to grow. Maybe this first year, learning IWDS 2.0, maybe you rationalize a conservative proposal on program year 26, and then indicate you think that all of what I just mentioned can be incorporated into processes and better capture of MSGs in PY27. So you ask for a little bit of an increase. We'd love to see those kind of continuous improvements where they're reasonable and appropriate. Um, and then some system-wide ones. I think I've mentioned some of these, the IWDS 2.0 especially, SNAP work requirements, Medicaid work requirements. But this one up top, we kind of heard this in the last couple WIOA and workforce summits. It's here. Automation and AI are here. We can't deny it. We can't reject it. But how is that affecting employment opportunities, especially entry level opportunities? So, some companies are saying they're replacing some of those lower paying jobs with AI. If that's the case in your area, and that's maybe a reason why you're seeing less employment opportunities and less employment outcomes, let us know that in your proposal. Um, I'll mention this second one on significant upskilling for two reasons. When a dislocated worker comes into our program, sometimes all they're doing is getting assistance to prepare them to apply for new jobs in similar fields, and they only need a little bit of upskill to prepare them for a different setting. In other instances, it's not actually upskilling at all; it's a new career. Um, Under iWIDS 1.0, we really never recognize the differences, but you'll note in the services matrix and in the services available for selection in IWDS 2.0, you have on the job, I'm sorry, um, regular, your typical training programs, and then you have upskilling and retraining as an option. In the past, we never saw people selecting that. But think about what upskilling and retraining means. Look at your matrix and make sure we're capturing these in the appropriate way to differentiate them so that we can see how our system is operating, how we can maybe adapt to those individuals that want to stay in the same field but just need some upskilling and retraining, and those individuals that choose to go to a different field altogether. Only through data are we going to be able to see that and then prepare future technical assistance to reflect that. So I just want to mention the upskilling because it's something we historically have not really talked about. The old system didn't really capture in any significant way, but the new system will. So have your career planners be thinking about that. What type of training is it the individual participant is looking at and identify it in the appropriate way? And upskilling or a training program could be upskilling to one participant while it's absolute new training to the next. I'll use the example of a CNA program. We have had in the past many people lose their job of no fault of their own, recognize that they aren't going to find a job in that field, specifically that occupation, and so they change their career. And we've seen a lot of people go into CDL driving from manufacturing, as an example, or CNA, because they knew it was a good opportunity, a lot of employment opportunities, and good wages. So if an individual comes from a different sector into a CNA program, that's just training. It's not retraining, it's not upskilling. However, if we talk about a CNA current going into RN training, that could be considered as upskilling, right? Because they're increasing their current skill level as a nurse. And it's not really, necessarily just our typical training program where they're learning a new skill altogether. So, somewhat of an example of how you can differentiate upskilling and typical training models, occupational skills training models, and how the same program might be reflected in different ways depending on the participant enrolling. And then the last couple things here is let us know what your economic picture looks like in your local area and region, to let us know how you think that is affecting your potential outcomes in the future and your proposed goals. And then our last statement to deal well was that we thought median earnings were leveling off for a couple reasons. More participants being employed in part-time wages, not or on part-time employment, not getting full-time wages, or not getting bonuses as they did for many years. And so while the wage, maybe the wage rate is similar to it's been the last several years, maybe even increased minimally, the overall income and wages are not up to the level they've been in the past because those bonuses weren't included. All right, so a lot of information there on things to consider. Keep these few slides very handy as a negotiation team as you start thinking about how to plan for your negotiation and submit your proposed goals. With that, just a little bit of a quick note here. I've got the wrong reference. As Ray reminded me in chat, there actually is a change to this negotiation sanctions guidance, Teagle 1119. Google that. I'll get this corrected in this version and give it Kirsten. So what gets uploaded to the ICSPS and WorkNet platforms with the recording recognizes there's a change to. But for your purposes, if you're preparing, do a Google search or whatever search, whatever technology you're using, and make sure you're looking at change two. While not significant, I'm sure there are some changes that you want to be aware of that are outlined within that guidance. As I turn it over to Andy, just a few things as a reminder. We've changed some of the elements of the negotiation tool, but most of it's going to look very familiar to you from the PY 24-25 model. We have introductions and glossary. Some of these have been moved to the back. We know you want to jump right into the numbers, so we put the glossary and some other things maybe at the back of the tool rather than the front. We're giving you history since program year 2021. That history does recognize Swiss wages. So again, it may look a little different than what you have historically been thinking your outcomes were, as expressed by IWDS and IPATS that was omitting Swiss wages. We're showing you the numerator and denominator because one of the factors is how you can help the state meet its goals. What's your percentage of our overall numbers in both those numerator and denominator cohorts? So you'll be able to see how much you have a factor on our outcomes as a state. We give you the rankings. Again, that's another comparison tool. So you'll see what quartile you're in. And you can, hopefully try to get yourself a little bit higher in those rankings with your outcomes in the future, and your proposals would reflect that interest. And then he'll talk a little bit about the SAM and show you some of the sheets that relate to or pages that relate to the statistical adjustment model adjustments. I'm going to turn it over to Andy now, and review and see if there's any questions I can be answering. So Andy, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mark. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to give you a live demo of the negotiation tool. So this should be pretty familiar for those that have been in this negotiation process before. We have the negotiation tool hosted on the Power BI platform, which will let you view all of the data that we have on offer from your browser. It doesn't require a spreadsheet or anything like that. To change pages, there's this navigation panel on the bottom center of the page where it says 1 of 30. There are also these arrows pointing left and right to advance or go back one page at a time. With 30 pages, you can also just click the center of the table of contents. That will bring up the full list of pages if you want to jump around. Say, if I want to go from the intro all the way to the appendix at the end of the report, fastest way to do that will be by clicking on bottom center of the page, which brings up the full list of pages. So when you're stuck on a page, you can click the arrows or on the table of contents at the bottom center of the page. There's a glossary of key terms in the negotiation tool, which I won't go over now because I'm going to be walking you through what each of these mean as we're using them. So the first data page we have is the model overview. This is looking at a very high level, what does the statistical adjustment model predict your performance outcomes to look like for program years 2026 and 2027? And how does that compare to what your actual outcomes looked like in program year 2024? So this first column, the PY24 actual, that is what was your actual indicator of performance in each of these tables. So what was your actual employment rate for adults? What was your actual employment rate for dislocated workers, and so on? Simulated performance, this is based on the program year 2024 data. This is what the model would expect your outcomes to be in program year 2026 and 2027, assuming that your participant base and your economic conditions are going to look pretty similar from those. So the prediction is always based on data we already have at hand. There is a lot of uncertainty to the predictions, but regardless, this is just looking at, based on the data that we have in the model, what does the model think your performance outcome would look like? Then the difference column is simply your actual outcome minus the simulated performance. So it is the difference between this and this. If there's a small difference, it means that the model was pretty close to what actually happened last year. If there's a big difference, that means that we need to do better on my end at trying to predict that performance. Now, the DCEO is not going to negotiate strictly towards that simulated performance. So if, say, there's a 10% difference, that doesn't mean that you're going to need to negotiate towards a 10% higher target, but it's just simply for reference, this is how far off the model's prediction was from what actually happened in that last year based on the data. And then for reference, we also have the share of statewide denominator. So this is at a high level, how do the participants in your local area contribute to the statewide goals? And then also for reference, we just have what was the statewide goal for each measure of performance that year, just as another frame of reference, setting the stage for that negotiation process. Because one of the negotiation factors is, how does your local area help the state meet its goals? So these are just some of the considerations for negotiations at a very high level. And now the next few pages have performance history. This doesn't have anything to do with the model. This is just looking at what were your actual performance outcomes over the past few years. The averages, that's not necessarily weighted by how many participants you had in a given year. It's just showing, on average, what did your outcome usually look like for that program and that cohort. And then we also have the option to compare your outcomes by local areas towards the end of the report with a shortcut button here. So this is where you could see, how does your local area compare to the state and to other neighbors? So move this to zoom panel here. So just for an example, you could see, how does LWIA 10 compared to LWIA's 11 and 13? This is going to be the page you can use if you want to see how some local areas compare to their neighbors or other boards of similar size. Now, if you wanted to, you could just keep selecting more and more geographies. But in the interest of keeping these comparisons readable, I would suggest not selecting more than one or two. And you can use Control-Click to select more. I'm sorry if you're not a fan of the colors for your particular area, but it is kind of hard to assign color schemes for all 22 local areas. So that's just something to be aware of, is that we did not necessarily have say on which colors went to each board. I think Mark also mentioned a program history page, which is brand new to the negotiation tool this time around. This is looking at the trends in how many participants were in your numerator and your denominator over the past few years. So are the number of participants going up or down? Then towards the end of each of these charts is just showing of your participants, how big is that in the grand scheme of the state. So as an example here, LWIA 1 has about 3% of the participants for adult second quarter employment rates. The reason we only show these percentages of the statewide total for the end of the chart is because those percentages are pretty consistent from one year to the next. So if there's a high percentage at the end of the line, you probably also had a high percentage at the start of the line. Those percentages are just purely descriptive. It's a way of looking at how does your local area contribute to the statewide goals. And we have one page each for adult, dislocated worker, and youth. We don't provide these charts for median earnings because the typical numerator and denominator don't really apply for that. If you want to see the denominator for your median earnings, we have that on the performance history page. If you want to know your numerator for the median earnings, oh, I'm sorry, I had that backwards. The numerator for median earnings would be your actual outcome. The denominator for median earnings is the same as this line here, your numerator for second quarter employment rates. The denominator for earnings is just how many people had a job in that cohorts. So after we get through the performance history, we also have some outcome rankings. This is how you can see how your local area stacked up against all the others on each given indicator of performance. This feature was in previous versions of the negotiation tool. We've made 2 changes for it since last time. We now have historical data, so we start out with 2024, but if you want to see how you did in 2021 or 2022, that information is available from the slicer up in the corner. And we also added some shading just to highlight where each area stands in terms of the top 25%, the upper middle 25%, lower middle, and so on. So that's one more thing to consider in the negotiations process. After those outcome rankings, we have the detailed results of the negotiation tool. This is similar information to what we've had in previous versions of the statistical adjustment model, but we keep trying to streamline it. This paragraph box here is a way of trying to condense the information in this big table on the right. So this table on the right is showing how each variable in the statistical adjustment model contributes to your predicted performance, the 76.6% as an example. And this paragraph is describing some of the highlights from that table. It just shows you what the model predicts your performance outcome to be. It shows what had the effects on the biggest increase and decrease for your predicted performance and how big those effects were. And this bar graph on the corner of the sheet is that it will show you what your goal was in program year 2024, what your actual outcome was last year, and then the green bar is how the model's prediction compares to each of those. So you can see, did the model predict something that's in line with how you've done in the past and how you've negotiated in the past, or are there some differences that might need to be discussed during the negotiation process? The dotted line is just for a frame of reference, what the state's goal is that year. So you can see, are you getting close to that statewide goal? Are you maybe contributing more or so on? It's just another frame of reference in terms of these outcomes, because sometimes it's hard to tell, is 75% a little or a lot? Well, that really depends on the statewide context. So that's why that dotted line is there. We have a page like this for each of the 15 measures of performance. And we will be providing some PDFs where you can download and see the results for your local area all at once. After the detailed results, we have some reference pages on using the results and frequently asked questions and those actuals over time that I compared before. But while we're here, I'd actually like to walk through a few case studies or use cases you can do with the negotiation tool. It might help you think about the data a little bit more. And I think I've given these examples at previous workforce summits, but I think it's good to revisit them because we have newer data for it. Now, one thing that's interesting in the negotiation tool is you might want to think about how would the model change if there were some changes in your local economy. So suppose you're expecting some layoffs in manufacturing and you're going to be seeing more participants that are unemployed when they enter the program. How would that affect how the model predicts your performance? So for here, let's say we're seeing that about 5% of your participants were unemployed at entry in the program. Wait, no, I'm looking at the wrong thing. That's the unemployment rate. So I'm looking for unemployed at entry. So let's try it this way. Was I looking at a different one? Oh, it's because my example, I was trying to use dislocated worker when I had this prepared for adult. So in the adult program, LWIA 1, about 72% of their participants were unemployed when they entered the program in PY24. And we saw that about their manufacturing jobs, they decreased by, what's manufacturing on here? And manufacturing employment decreased by about 1%. Now let's see what would happen if the number of participants that were unemployed at entry increased from 71% to 90%. And then let's say manufacturing jobs decreased by 10%. The way you would think about that in the negotiation tool is you're going to keep this coefficient thing the same as it is, but you would replace the 71.6 with a hypothetical value on a piece of paper or an Excel table. And the slides will walk through this, an example with some screenshots, but in this case, say, let's suppose the 90% of your participants were unemployed when they entered the program. So what effect would that have on the negotiation tool? We'd multiply that negative 0.09 here in the coefficient column by 90%, which is the hypothetical new actual percentage that were unemployed at entry. I had this written down on my screen. I'm just pulling up that. So if we multiply 0.0, this is 0.9 times 90%, that would give us negative 8.1%. So if 90% of your participants were unemployed at entry, that means that we would expect an 8% decrease in your employment rate for exiters just based on that. Now, let's suppose at the same time that you're seeing more people that are unemployed at entry, there were a lot of layoffs in manufacturing. Suppose there was a 10% decrease in manufacturing employment, and that's why there are so many of your participants that are now unemployed at entry. So if we wanted to walk through how that would affect your performance outcomes in the prediction, we take this 0.17, multiply that by negative 10%. That would put us at minus 1.7%. So if there's a 10% drop in manufacturing, that would lead to about almost a 2% lower decrease in the employment outcomes. So just based on this hypothetical scenario where we're seeing more manufacturing layoffs and more participants who are unemployed at entry, those two events combined would probably decrease your employment outcomes by about 10%. So if you're trying to explore potential hypothetical scenarios in an area is going to be pretty similar from before. So that's just one hypothetical scenario. I'm sorry, I can't see the chat as I'm presenting this. Has anybody had any questions so far?
Not yet either. Just some of them are still trying to download the presentation that Kirsten had provided, but
Perfect. Thank you. Now, there are a few caveats I'd like to give if you're going to be thinking about economic scenarios in the negotiation tool. First of all, these are all strictly what-if scenarios, so this isn't necessarily used for predicting the future of your economy. So if you see a positive or negative coefficient here, that doesn't necessarily say anything about what's going to be actually happening in your local area for 1 year to the next. This is just sort of for what-if scenarios. So if 100% of our participants were unemployed at entry, how would that change our outcomes for participants? Or if all of our healthcare jobs were to disappear today, how would that change our outcomes? It's used for thinking about scenarios like that, not necessarily for trying to predict the future. Something else to keep in mind is that this data is just showing what happened to employment year over year in your local area, but that's not necessarily where all the outcomes are for participants. Due to commuting patterns, your participants might find jobs somewhere else. So there still could be other factors affecting their employment outcomes beyond just what's happening to jobs in the local area. And one more consideration is that the economy might recover to some extent between when people enter the program and when they exit the program. So what's happening to your employment base from 1 year to the next might not necessarily be the same job market that your people are looking at when they're looking for a job. So these can all just be considered starting points for thinking about how the economy factors into the predictions in the model. It's not a crystal ball, it's just a starting point for things to be thinking about as you're at the negotiation table. Now, one more thing I'd like to walk through while I have the negotiation tool is thinking about shifts in your participant characteristics might change your performance outcomes. So with this, we're going to take a look at median earnings for, the adult program. I'm going to adult earnings. So there are a lot of cases where your participant characteristics might change. So suppose there's a change in federal policies regarding training requirements, or suppose you're going after a new grant that includes more people in a target population. And if these sorts of things happen, you might see more of your participants with one target population characteristic or another. So let's think about how we might change our predicted performance if we're expecting a change in our participant base. So to do that, I'm just going to sort this negotiation tool by participant characteristics. These little icons on the table are a way of just summarizing what types of data points are getting at characteristics of your local area as a place, as a local economy. These little buildings are all employment characteristics or economic characteristics. These little people icons, this is all data looking at your actual participants' characteristics. So if I sort, so it shows the people on top, we can see what types of participant characteristics are in the model. Now, let's suppose that we're going to be looking at what would happen if we go after a grant for serving more participants that are veterans with disabilities, which would drive up this 2.9% and this 3.2%. So suppose a local area gets a grant to serve more veterans with disabilities, and as a result of that, they usually only served about 2 to 3% veterans and persons with disabilities, but then the new percentages goes from 3% to 10%. So the way we would model that is we take this coefficient of minus about almost $3,000, multiply that by 10%, we'd end up with about a $300 decrease. So if 10% of your participants were veterans, that would lead to, or 3%, 10% were participants with disabilities, that would lead to roughly a $300 decrease in what the model anticipates for your median earnings. By the same token, if we increase the percentage of participants that are veterans from 2% to 10%, we multiply this $4,500 by 10%, that would be about a $450 decrease in median earnings. So as a result of those two changes, that would lead to a decrease in median earnings of less than $1,000, but still fairly substantial, of almost about 700, I think. So these sorts of things you can use for maybe making a case for a different performance target than what the model is predicting. So if you say you're expecting to serve more participants of a characteristic than are shown here, that's how you can think about it. The negotiation tool, we're not meant to really bargain on saying, well, we were supposed to get a decrease, but it shouldn't be this much. But if there's something you're seeing in the data here for program year 2024 that you know is going to be different from what you're expecting in program year 2026, that's the sort of thing you should mention during negotiations. It could be that this data for 2024 isn't the best indication of what you're expecting for 2026. And that's where these hypothetical scenarios can be useful. It's a way of applying the data we have on hand to what you expect is going to happen in the future. And the way you do that is you take your coefficient in this column, you multiply it by a new percentage here. So those are just a few examples of how to think about new scenarios in the negotiation tool. The slides in this presentation have some more detail on that. And I can take any questions you might have on the negotiation tool from here. Thank you.
Yeah, great presentation, Andy. Thank you so much. No questions at this time. Please, again, if you have any questions, post those in the Q&A. And if they're directed to Andy, he'll be on the rest of the presentation to answer those, or we can answer those if they are about the actual negotiations. So we'll go ahead and finish out. I want to share my screen again and point out one thing and appreciate the explanations and examples. And to counter what Andy said, and in this example in the PowerPoint, he also threw in low income to that equation, which would have resulted in about a $1,500 change, which is pretty significant, although part of that $1,500 was already there for the 2.9 and 3.2 and 44.6% already. But let's say you are trying to utilize the SAM to identify the populations you want to serve. Of multiple participants with similar characteristics. Take a look at this view of the model, and let's replace low income with single parent. Let's say that veteran who has a disability is a single parent. We take a negative coefficient, we turn that into a positive. That could counter some of that decrease. The point being is every participant that comes to our program generally has multiple characteristics that are accounted for in this list of variables to try and figure out what population you should be serving to try and coerce an outcome for performance in the future is probably a losing battle and a running. I saw Andy's bike in the background. You're probably going to wear the tires out on his bike trying to figure this all out. I don't think that's the intent of the SAM, is to try to plan the participants you should serve. You should serve who you serve, and the outcomes are going to take care of themselves. So don't want to belabor that too much, but you have all positives and negatives up and down this line, and you don't know each participant what all variables they're bringing to the table. So you just need to serve them as they come in, serve them the best you can to get higher actual outcomes, and let the variables and the SAM outcomes do their adjusting accordingly. And we hope that no one has any unsuccessful outcomes because of that. So we've talked a lot about what to do leading up to all the preparations you need to do to prepare for these negotiations, the proposal that you need to submit, all the justification and all of the various information that should be accompanying your proposals this time around. Once you've done that, again, we will be reviewing your proposed goals and preparing for each of your calls individually as a team here at the our state negotiation team will then enter into a call with each of your local teams as well. We will ask who the identified lead is. We'll indicate who that lead is for us. And they're the ones that will be conducting the call. Everyone else on the call, whether it be state or local team members, will support that lead. Generally not speaking, not to say that they can't to present a point, but they will certainly be available for maybe a side conversation. That's usually what happens is in these calls, you might want to say, hey, okay, we see your proposal. We'd like to speak amongst ourselves. You might have a private call waiting for all of you to discuss and come back with a counter proposal. We're going to be doing the same things. I don't know that there's too many people on this call today that haven't been in past negotiations. I know a few LWIAs have changed, so you might have a few people where this is all new to you. But for the most part, some of you have had experience going through this. It's a back and forth, starting with proposals to finally a negotiated goal. Again, hopefully through all that information that you provide up front, you're just reiterating just that here's what we presented as our proposal. We really feel like this is our goal. It should be. We'll present our side, and we will come to an agreement on all of these negotiated goals. We'll finalize with a closing conference acknowledging each of the 15 negotiated goals. I did forget to mention at the beginning on the opening conference, we will let you know if there are any local proposals that we accept. Out of those 15, hopefully you've utilized the information in a similar way we will, and we can accept one or more of your proposals. If that's the case, we don't negotiate on it any further. We'll just acknowledge it in that closing conference. We will send the local board and CEO, plus all of you that need to be CC'd, a confirmation letter 10 days, within 10 days after completion of the negotiation call, so that you have that in hand as you move forward. Last thing I mentioned earlier in the PowerPoint is that you should include that in your local plan. Some of your local plans may need modifications formally. Others, you can just simply update a table, adding in the negotiated goals. I prefer you do it that way to save the trouble of going back to the board and updating and modifying, going through that process that sometimes takes quite a bit of time to get final modifications through the system. But it's really up to how your plan is designed and the individuals that need to be involved in that process. Just some reminders. I mentioned some other policies before. We have assessing policy. We have performance sanctions. I referenced the 3.8 policy, which is actually negotiations. And we also want to always remind you there's a couple websites you can see historical videos. This video recording of the webinar today will be added to these websites for your reference. We're still updating the videos and training materials, which is Illinois WorkNet based, to add the July 15th assessing performance webinar. It is up on the ICSPS, or Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Report. Kirsten and the team there have updated their website. So if you're looking for that recording, if you missed it or just need to reference some information on that, you can go to that. But the actual thresholds haven't changed. They're still 70%. But as I mentioned, if you did not meet your adjusted goals, there is no sanction for PY24 and 25. We will start applying that for PY26 as we've made this known during this negotiation process. We could apply a sanction for failure to report. That generally will come in a monitoring visit. They'll identify that you didn't report accurately, timely, or completely. But that's up to hopefully up to its monitoring generally doing. Hopefully that's not going to happen. You all are doing that on a timely basis. But again, the pilot project or the extension of the hold harmless does not affect the fact that you still have to report in a timely manner. I'm not seeing any additional questions. Kirsten, if you can open up the phone lines, maybe someone wants to phone lines. I act like I'm on a conference call. open up the microphone. So if anyone has any other questions or comments at this time, we've got a few minutes left before we conclude today's webinar. Here is our team again, as far as references to how you or who you should contact in certain situations. You'll note on the proposal form now, this CEO performance reporting at illinois.gov is where you should send your proposal forms. The reason for that is all these that have a CEO.OET in front of them, including the performance reporting and the ETBL coordinator emails, are accessible to all of us in our unit. That way, you're not waiting if someone's on leave or busy in meetings. Someone else can be accessing that email and potentially providing you a more timely response in situations where we need to discuss these. We'll come together and send a response through that email. If you want to CC one or more of us, we certainly will accept that, but we really would like to get more of you to start using these two emails so that others can provide some responses as you speak to your providers, whether they be training, service, what have you. Please direct them to these resources as well so that we again can provide timely response to you. The one exception to that is eligibility. It doesn't really fit into the performance reporting, but we don't get very many calls now for eligibility clarification. So we've left that as not needing its own separate illinois.gov email. Email Ray directly, CC me in those, and Ray and I will work within the rest of us in the unit to provide you a response. But again, we've got some upcoming vacations. I know I just came off of one, and this just allows you to get your response quicker than waiting for someone to come back from leave if all you've done is direct that to an individual. So anyone, if the microphone's open, anyone have any questions or comments to make verbally that they didn't want to type in the Q&A?
Yeah, if you would like to speak verbally, you can raise your Zoom hand on your toolbar, and I'm happy to unmute you.
Was the information clear enough that there are no questions? Like I said, I think many of you, I'm just looking down the list, many of you have been through this process. A couple of LWIAs, have changed some leadership and administration in the last couple of years. So certainly if this is all somewhat foreign to you, let us know and we can help you through it. But those of you that have been through this, we really didn't change much of anything. The tools got a little bit of different look to it and some new fields, but really looks very familiar what you saw 2 years ago when we implemented this first online version of the tool. It's a Power BI platform similar to the assessment. So at least the look and feel is very consistent for all of you. And really the only change is that justification and validating information request with your proposed form. So I'm hoping that's the reason we're getting few questions, is that you're all familiar enough with the process. We're just reiterating all of that to you, and now it's a good reminder and clear to everyone. We'll be here for another 4 to 5 minutes unless everyone starts leaving. But if you don't have any questions, you're free to go ahead and head back to your daily work. We again appreciate all of your involvement, all of your assistance, all of your support of the system here in Illinois, and look forward to working with all of you who will be part of the local teams. I always look forward to these, getting to see all of you virtually and talk with you and come to agreements.
No one is raising their hand or anything, and everyone's just saying thank you in the chat.
Okay, with that, it looks like most people are saying thank you and seeing a lot of people signing out. So we will go ahead and end the webinar at this time. Let us know if, as you start looking through all the information, you have any questions. We certainly want to look at them. If it's something we need to share with the entire team, we want to be able to do that. I'm sorry, not with the entire team, but with all of you locally. We want to make sure we send out a email clarification to everyone so that we can make sure everyone's on the same page with the understanding going into this round of negotiations. Again, have a great day. Look forward to talking with you all again soon. Thank you.